Hello and welcome, everybody, to the Six Pixels Under podcast. I am NS, your host. This is episode 34. And on this week's podcast, we will talk about, of course, the big news about the WoW Classic launch date. That's exciting. We'll talk a bit about the news that Nintendo Switch has surpassed total sales for PlayStation 4 in Japan. It's interesting. We'll talk about, of course, the big drama about the whole Epic Store and publishers pulling their game and apparently not being notified that there was a sale in the first place or how it was supposed to be structured. One of those games being Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, and I believe the other one was Borderlands 3. So some big profile games, if I remember correctly. And then also we'll talk a bit about a couple other interesting topics before getting to the From the Vault section this week, which I promised you guys from last week that I would do. And yeah, so I think you guys will like that episode, or that segment, I guess I should say, of From the Vault. I picked one that's not incredibly too old, but definitely is one that certainly got forgotten. I mean, I almost forgot about it, and I was looking at a list of games and thinking of which one to host on the From the Vault section, which, if you guys remember, is just a section where we talk about a classic game and maybe its impact or interesting things about it, particular notable things about it, maybe even innovative things about it. What else do I have to cover at the top? Oh, speaking of which, I saw in chat some mention of the Detective Pikachu movie. I went and saw it recently, in fact, I think 2 days ago with my girlfriend, and I enjoyed it. I definitely saw a lot of nice little nostalgic kind of, I guess you would say, Easter eggs. You saw people in the same costumes, and certain little tropes were common a lot of the time. Some decent humor. It wasn't overly cheesy or anything like that. Obviously, the plot itself was kind of expected. I mean, it was pretty typical. The dialogue reminded me of the anime. Like whenever you watched the anime as a kid. It really reminded me of that, because it's just it's obviously written for kids. But that being said, I still enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was funny, and I enjoyed doing that more than I enjoyed reading about some of the drama in this week's news. Before we get into the drama too much, let's just talk about the news that, according to Mitsu, it's official that in Japan, the Nintendo Switch, whoops, translate that, has outsold the PS4 in overall sales. Now, here we go. Where is the Nintendo Switch? Oh, there you go. There's the source, according to Mitsu. Nintendo Switch has sold 83,000 hard estimated sales, I believe. Wonder what that means by total. The numbers look a little bit. Obviously, the numbers are totally. I would ignore them. They're probably totally wrong. I don't even know what currency I'm looking at, or is this just an amount of copies? Point being, we see that the Switch number is bigger than the PS4. So if that means it, then we can trust this source. It looks like, and Famitsu, from what I remember, is pretty reputable. I don't think they would just put this out there. But yeah, it's interesting for me, because I could have swore just a couple of years ago you were having people say, well, console games are coming to an end, PC's taking over. And they said it almost matter of fact. And then it kind of reminded me of what people said about arcades and how arcades were going to die out. And then you talk about, a lot of arcades still being quite prominent. And I don't mean arcades in the sense of physical arcade. Those have absolutely died, unfortunately. Even though they're awesome. And one of my favorite places to go, by the way. But I meant arcades as in arcade cabinets are still around, of course. Arcades in terms of Xbox Arcade. I think even PlayStation has an arcade. Many different platforms have arcades, and obviously arcade style of games is alive and well, is what I really mean to say. But Nintendo Switch to me is kind of like, well, maybe the LAN party isn't dead. Kind of what I think about it, I guess. No, I know I don't know anybody around me has an Xbox who's willing to come over and link it up for a LAN party or something. But I know people with Nintendo Switches, and I know people who travel with their Nintendo Switch and who go to conventions with their Switch, and etc. etc. So I think it's bringing back the console to like the handheld and merging them together, almost as if that's the maybe one of the best ways to keep it alive, or maybe just another way, as typical from Nintendo, who have their way of doing things. I don't know. I think it's interesting. Japan is really big on handhelds, and that's actually a really good point. That's a really good point because they probably would sell better there than they would maybe other countries. It's just interesting to see, I guess. I wonder. You think of like MMOs and LAN, and they almost seem like they run like opposite from each other. And I think that that's true in some cases, but I think that they're also based on a lot of the same values, social interaction, having people interact with each other and making that like a key part of your entertainment experience in the case of the Switch, or game experience in the case of like an MMO. Yeah, no, I've enjoyed my Switch so far, Card. I will say that I'm eager for some bigger hitters to come out, like maybe the next Pokemon game. That would be cool because they came out with a Pokemon game and they allowed it to be co-op, which is like cool, right? You think that's cool, but the co-op is literally just cloning you and your Pokemon. So in theory, it sounds cool, but then when you're playing it, you're just beating up on one dude with two Pokemon. It's just like, who designed this? Like, I don't know what it is about Nintendo with being like really horrible at designing multiplayer experiences, oftentimes. But yeah, that co-op experience is like, what are you guys thinking? Like, who's gonna play this? It's too easy. There's no real balancing, you know. But also Persona coming out on the Switch would be cool. That'd be another worthwhile purchase. I would say with MMOs, it's usually the only aspect that holds up. That doesn't really surprise me. Space is a real premium in Japan, and public transportation is huge there. Good point. A good point. Not everybody even has the space to have a computer, right? All right, so let's get into the drama part now. There's been a article published on Kotaku regarding the recent publisher drama, specifically with Epic Store. During, supposedly there was going to be some big sale where things were supposed to be an additional $10 off overall, but then mysteriously, like a couple games, and I think it was two in particular, were pulled from the store, the Epic Store, and it was done kind of like hush hush, and it caught people kind of off guard. The big hitters here are actually Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, as I mentioned at the top, and even I saw mention of Borderlands 3 as well were pulled from the shop. Apparently, Epic had done this sale without really notifying either party, and this came to light actually when I was reading through the comments of the article itself. Somebody said something along the lines of, at first, Paradox said that they were not aware of the sale mechanism, right? And other publishers also had said that as well. And then apparently a source came out from the Epic employee himself where it stated that he says, and this was translated by the way, but it says, "I was sure that Paradox were aware aware of the sale mechanism. After a little investigation, it turned out that I was wrong." That does not sound good. So not everybody who was involved in the platform itself, or publisher agreement, whatever you want to call it, they weren't even aware of the sell. I don't know. That has me a little bit worried. And then they also mentioned that current promotions apply to all releases of the store, which is kind of like strange to think about because people were doing the math and kind of crunching it, and you're thinking like, okay, well, like here's an example. Let's say my game costs $50, and on the Epic Store it now costs $40. Well, what if on that $40 there's an additional $10 cut from the revenue? So now you're talking about what if they do a sale before the game comes out to where people are potentially buying the game from 50 to 75% discounts before they even get, so the developer in this case is giving up like half of their revenue, 25% to half of their revenue, essentially because they weren't aware of a particular sale. And that's because, think about it, what's the use of pre-ordering when you could just wait until it goes on sale? Why not just wait until Epic does one of these sales and then buy it in that case, right? Well, Epic actually didn't, or Epic said that they mentioned it, but then the employee himself said that he was not aware, or sorry, rather, he was corrected that after a little bit of investigation, apparently people weren't completely aware of the mechanism, of the sale mechanism. So yeah, that's what news came out initially, was that, well, I mean, this was a sale, this was kind of like they should have known about this. But the reason why it caught people kind of off guard was that it happened so fast, and whenever someone pulls a product like that right away, it's typically because of a dispute. It's not because somebody's like agreeing with it and they're just like, yeah, you know what, I'm okay with that. I think that's okay to have this sale right now. Obviously, there was some disagreement, and the speed at which it was brought down makes me think that they dropped the hammer quick, and they were like, hey, we're not going to be involved in this, period. And then maybe Epic was just like, not worth the fight, so then let them drop from the store, and then maybe have further negotiations, or I don't know. I guess we'll have to see, right? It's interesting to watch unfold, though. Yeah, no, there's been a whole rabbit hole of news. As typical in these threads, if you go to the comments, especially on like the Reddit threads, you can find a lot of good information, surprisingly, because people will kind of keep updating the thread as it goes on. I think there might be an update here at the bottom as well. He was just the writer was just offering some commentary. He was saying that yes, Steam has problems and such, but this comes down, this being the publishers pulling their game from the Epic Store. But he said this comes on top of Epic's bare-bone feature set, other assorted issues, unpopular penchant for snapping up exclusives. He should also add no reviews, things of that sort. At least it's no force reviews. So I guess you can disable reviews if you'd want to. There's obvious reasons why Epic Games, Epic Store as a platform is inferior to competition, but there's also a lot of good arguments in regards to just the way that they handle or conduct their business. And we've talked about this before on the podcast, how 2019, 2020 is looking like the battle of publishers. It's the war of the publishers, and now they're getting their own platform, and they're trying to make war with that as well. And I at first I didn't care as much, I guess, about the competition, because I didn't think it would involve publisher relationships so closely. Now we're seeing, like, the case of Epic and even just Origin and Ubisoft and these different platforms, that it's becoming more and more about the money. So they want to have as much of that as they can, so they want control of the platform themselves. And they're willing to essentially give an inferior product in order to do that. And I think that's kind of what pisses and irks many, gamers off. As I should say the PC version, especially the PC audience, I should say, especially, is it's because you're not only coming in and gobbling up these exclusives, but you're putting them on essentially an inferior product. And if there's one thing about the PC master race, if they could willingly get a better graphics card, they wouldn't get the cheaper graphics card, if that makes sense, right? If money wasn't an issue for any of us, and we could get a 1080 Ti, why would we get the 980 Ti? Like, most people are going to choose the 1080 Ti. And in this, case, to bring in the analogy, Epic Store compared to Valve at this point with Steam is kind of like that comparison. Not quite there yet. I think competition is good, but my initial view of competition is good has kind of changed a little bit, just because it's not really competition between developers, which is what I personally would like. Competition between developers makes it to where the next developer, the next game is trying to be bolder, better, maybe improve on a certain genre, maybe, take inspiration from another game. It's about competing in the space of art, right? Artistic value. If I know I'm getting a little bit esoteric, but it's competing in that fashion. With the whole, Epic Store and all these different platform wars, it's more so battling amongst the publishers. And the problem with that is that consumers, us in this case, right, the gamers, and then the developers themselves, unfortunately, they get hurt in the crossfire. And the perfect example of this is review bombing. Review bombing has been primarily a weapon used against these, publishers, platforms. The problem with it is that they're review bombing the developers, who in some cases have no say over where their game gets played. If they accepted a contract or a deal to be published in order to be funded to put out their game, in order for it to come out, right, if they didn't have the funding otherwise, they might have, kind of gotten into an agreement where they don't own the IP that they created themselves, which means that this other, publisher can launch it on their platform or another platform of their choice because of the money, because of the commerce, right? Because of the business. It makes sense for them. And sometimes in developers' cases, and we've proven this time and time again, guys, proven this time and time again, that in many cases, developers have no say in where their game gets played and what platform it gets played on. So this is becoming more increasingly interesting to watch unfold, but also grim dark, I should say, because it's going to get a little bit darker, I think, before the light comes in this particular issue. And I think that, as I said, again, competition is always good because you want other platforms to be able to offer unique things. I mean, we talk about the different platforms in general. You look at Valve and Steam, and we talk about Xfire from the old days, and IRC, and we have Discord, and all these different. Remember all the different raid calls and Trillos and TeamSpeak, Mumble. What am I missing? LeetSpeak. I'm sure I'm missing a couple different names. Point being is that happened. All those different platforms, those vocal platforms, those happened, and only essentially like the best remained. And you might ask, well, why is Discord around? Discord was the new kid on the block who kind of took the cool ideas from IRC and was like, maybe we could do that with TeamSpeak, what TeamSpeak has, and create these servers and the ability to have bots and all these different things like that, and Ventrilo and etc. So it learned from its predecessors, I guess I should say. And I don't really know how developers in the future are going to necessarily learn from this, because sometimes if you want to put out something that you spent 4 to 5 years working on and you don't have the means, sometimes you kind of have to make a deal with the devil. And I don't mean to say that getting involved with a publisher period or an investor period means you're making a deal with the devil. But, I've brought this up before, and this is to help, in my opinion, really just give these developers in these situations a little bit of empathy. And it's that, think about it. You're at the finish line. You want to launch this game that you spent years and years working on, maybe even years before that, maybe a childhood dream. Whatever the case may be, you spent years and so much of your time, and then all of a sudden you get to the finish line and you're like, man, we don't even have a publisher. We can't even launch this game. We don't have enough money. We can't afford to go on this platform or whatever else, right? Then you're like, well, man, we should get involved with a publisher then, or an investor. And then you think about and you weigh the pros and cons, right? And there are pros and there are cons. But now there are extra cons, because now you don't even know if, like, maybe you enter the publisher relationship and they do this work for you. But then they decide, well, actually, we're going to launch it on the platform. So now they're affecting your business. They're affecting your profit, and also getting you tied up into this whole dramatic scenario where now people are going to review bomb you and your other games, which are otherwise great games. They're not even review bombing them because of the quality of the game. They're just review bombing because they disagree. Anyway, It's there's a lot that goes into it, but I guess that's my best way. You've got an amazing story about those Discord bots. You've got to tell me about that. Discord bots as in spies and Eve or something like that. Speaking of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, by the way, guys, apparently there is another Vampire the Masquerade role-playing game in development.
Hey, thanks. But you've got
From the
wrong
creators
guy.
of the game
I'm good at
Council.
shooting people, cracking wise, and
There
pretending
is
to know how to fight with my hands.
another Vampire the Masquerade game. Apparently, though, it's going to be more about, it says, full of occult plots, conspiracies, secret organizations. It's Vampire the Masquerade without the fangs. So it's essentially the universe. Actually, wait, it says a company recent acquisition of Werewolf. Okay, so I didn't know that they acquired Werewolf. Huh. Interesting. Anyway, sorry. I sidetracked myself. No other real news about it other than that. There's no gameplay footage. There's no details about what it entails. Obviously, other than it's not going to be entirely about vampires. But it's just, I'm happy to see more RPGs being done in bold and I would say, you know, risque universe. Tired of the same old dry fantasy. I think it's interesting to get involved with the vampires, get involved with, you know, zombie RPGs again. And actually, you know what? People are probably tired of that as well. With the recent Fallout, you know, 76 stuff. People are probably tired of that as well. So actually, I take that back. What do I have here? Oh, no, I already covered that. All right, so let me go ahead and get to the from the vault segment of the podcast. I wanted to highlight an MMO in particular, one that's certainly lesser known, one that doesn't get quite the recognition that maybe it deserves, and one that hails from the Sweden, or the country of Sweden. So if you guys have ever heard, let me get my titles fixed. If you have heard of this game, I'm going to be greatly surprised. It was a massive multiplayer online game developed by Code Club AB in Sweden. Development started in 2003 by friends Rolf Johnson, if I'm saying his name anyway correctly, and then Marcus Persson, and it was released for personal computers via Java. You know, I guess it uses like a browser-based Java platform. In 2006, so this game came out in 2006. It had 3 years of development. It's a player world of over 133 skills. You can basically create and terraform anything in the world, dig things. You can raise terrain. You can lower it. You can flatten it. You can sculpt things. You can construct buildings, ships. You think it. There's a variety of legendary creatures and monsters that you can battle. There's thousands of items that you can craft, because the craziest thing about Wurm Online, by the way, is that everything in the game but the natural environment itself is created by the players, and every action in the game is affected by one or more skills. So the cool thing about Wurm Online is that everything in the game is crafted, because everything is part of an ecosystem. So I have a couple gameplay clips that I was going to show you guys here. That was a PvP clip. And this was actually a really cool clip that I'm going to go ahead and put on faster speed here. But this was showcasing some of the ability to craft in the game. And I'm going to put this on 2x speed. So Wurm Online, as I said, came out in 2006. It's a sandbox, you know, open world RPG. Basically, I think of it as like Ultima Online in the sense that it has individual servers or shards, if you will, and new ones are popping up. At least back when more people were playing it, new ones would pop up all the time. Recently, they, however, had a free-to-play launch on Steam, and that was called or labeled Wurm Unlimited. Link that here. Whoops. Sorry. Yeah, so it's showing the different levels of progression of crafting here. For those who aren't watching live or aren't watching the video, it's showing how the guy's taking the detail in this video titled Framing Up the Workshop to go through and literally just take the time to do piece by piece frame job so he can put together his workshop. Unfortunately, it doesn't show the entire completed work, but this is just like a fraction of the kind of building that you can do in Wurm. Let's play the little trailer here. I wanted to talk about this game in particular because it's one of those where it's almost a victim of being too ambitious. And what I mean by that is that we talk about this a couple of times in the Death of a Game series. Games like Shadowbane are perfect examples where people have this big grand vision, but they don't exactly have the means of getting it accomplished. So when they do get it accomplished, it almost always has to give up or sacrifice in some way, shape, or form. And as you guys have probably already guessed from watching the gameplay and a little bit of gameplay in the trailer footage here, is that the game isn't the best looking game. It doesn't have the best animations. Combat isn't necessarily a big focus in the game. It's more about building, creating, living in the world, shaping the world, and that's a big part of the game. And I like to talk about games like Wurm simply because they're a game where instead of creating massive amounts of developer-made content, raids and dungeons and big quest lines and all this different stuff, instead of focusing on stuff like that, what they instead do is truly focus on the aspect of giving you a sandbox. And I'm not just saying a sandbox as in everyone says everything is a sandbox these days. If it isn't just or if it isn't just a theme park, everyone thinks it's a sandbox. No, Wurm Unlimited, or Wurm Online, I should say, the Unlimited as a free-to-play version. But Wurm Online is a true sandbox. You can change like the level of the ground. You can build on multiple different platforms. You can build. In fact, I have a handy, cool little video for you guys to watch here that I found on YouTube randomly. It's a top 10 video talking about some of the craziest things
you can do in Wurm.
You can do in Wurm Online. Let's go ahead and put this on 1.5 speed.
In the realm of MMOs, Wurm has always stood out for its quirky charm and deep gameplay. It has never been one to conform to what other MMOs were doing. Thus, you will find a lot of weird and wonderful hidden features and things that you can do
in agreement,
that you would just
Lemposs.
never see in other MMOs. Today, we're going to count down
for
the 10
those.
craziest
Sorry,
things
I
you
should
can
just
do in
read
Wurm.
people's
A big
comments
thanks
out
goes
loud
out to the Wurm
for
community,
those who
who
listen
helped
to
me
it on
figure out
SoundCloud.
many of the things
But
we'll see
Lemposs
this
said,
video.
man, a game like this looking
Starting with number
actually
10,
good would be pretty
live on a
dope.
mountain
And I'm
peak.
in total agreement.
Lots of MMOs have player housing, but usually it's quite restricted on where
Look at that.
build
You can
or
live on a damn
In Wurm,
mountain.
however,
Look
you
at
can
the
build
level
your
of
house on any
terraforming in this
unclaimed
game,
land,
guys.
even
That's
if it's on the very
insane.
top of a mountain. In
It's
Wurm,
important
you
we
can
talk
truly be
about
the king
games
of
that
the
are
castle.
oftentimes forgotten,
Number
like
9,
Wurm,
spawn
just
an island.
because of things
In
like
the old days, by completing a
there's
series
so
of
much
personal goals,
innovative
you could
that's
get something
added
called the Wand of the Seas that
because
would allow you to
of the
spawn your very
ability
own
to
island.
allow you to
Although
truly
that game
shape
mechanic
your
has since
world,
changed,
right?
You'll still find players selling them from
Because you
time
can
to
build
time.
an island.
Apparently, they can still be found on the
I mean, this
Epic
is
PvP
crazy.
server as well.
And
even
this
if you
game
never
is
get
still
your hands
playable
on one,
today.
there's nothing
Unfortunately, the
stopping you from
player
dumping a whole
count
bunch of dirt
isn't
into the sea
so
and
great.
creating your island that way.
So
Absolutely
if
doable,
you're expecting a
although
big
it would be
player
hard work, of course. How many MMOs do you
population,
know
that's probably not going to happen. I
Amazing.
will say though,
Number 8.
I figured I'd mention this one as well because I have a desire to play it. I never. What?
Some MMOs such as World of Warcraft allow you to also
Can you really do that? That's pretty funny.
Corpses? Annoy your neighbors by catapulting dead cows all
What?
over the place. Or if you're on the PvP side, why not break down a fort with the
Is
body
this
of
stuff
an
really
enemy?
in the game?
Number
This is
6.
crazy.
Pull a beating heart out of a corpse.
I can't even make
In
this
Wurm,
up.
Pretty much every item has its own 3D model that can be set on the ground or even placed on a table. This includes items
A game like this would be
such as
perfect for a
letters,
roleplay community.
paws, and even hearts.
And I mean,
Special
obviously,
thing
that's
also
probably
is
the
that
only
you have
community
infinite
left
motion
playing the
control
game,
forever and
unfortunately.
ever.
Probably
That
the
looks pretty
roleplay
cool on
community.
PvP, but take that one step further by combining 60
Oh,
items
they're
together
doing some
and
voodoo dark magic
to see
here.
them in
Oh wait,
action
you can
like this.
edit
It's
and
also
move
known as
objects around?
Outsells, who
Okay.
all love to stay
What?
Valentine's Day.
In Galaxies, guys, in Star Wars Galaxies, the way we had to move custom objects around is we had to literally type in their coordinates. So it was a lot of trial and error until you got it right. And you always had that one guy in your guild, as Ludens would attest to, who was like really good at coordinates. So he could like exactly, you know, organize your guild hall so it looked cool.
Butchering corpses?
Worm,
This
a game
also
that came out in
includes
2006, which is
all
not
love to
much
stick those
after
plastic
Star Wars
on
Galaxies,
boxes
mind
from
you. In
the
that time,
Now you
it,
can do it
a
virtually
couple
in
years
MMO
is a
as
big
well.
difference.
The one-person
But allows you to
MMO
just
is
click and place things in different places. Like I mean, imagine if a game with like amazing 3D graphical fidelity, say for example, as you know, even just a fraction of something that we've seen on a PC game. Like, I mean, shit, it can even look like Mountain Blade. But imagine if Mountain Blade allowed you to customize and shape the world to this extent. You just imagine that? It wouldn't even have to be a server that allowed for thousands of people. It could even allow for hundreds of people. And it would still be a pretty damn good game. What else can we do?
In reality, it's merely a visual effect and won't burn you like an actual.
This shit just brings back memories, because all of the time and effort that people put in building the world and customizing it and making it look a particular way, that's what I spent so much time admiring in Star Wars Galaxies, even though I didn't necessarily do it myself. It was one of those things where I didn't necessarily have the patience to go through and build all of this stuff, but I greatly appreciated people who did. And I think player housing these days has gotten kind of almost like a pass. Actually, you know what? Like, let's get into a soapbox here. Sorry to break through this this From the Vault segment. I think we did a great job so far highlighting why this game should not be forgotten. But let's get soapy here for a second. I want to rant a little bit. I think what oftentimes, like, there are a couple things in the MMO industry that get kind of forgotten, or at least fallen by the wayside in regards to our level of maybe criticalness into their viability as like a feature. And let me put that in English. So say, for example, earlier Ludens mentioned that, or sorry, I get my Danes confused. I'm not kidding. Lemposs mentioned that. Let me actually go back and read it again. Yeah, Lemposs mentioned that looks were obviously a factor in this game. It doesn't look particularly good. Pretty ugly game. Imagine if you had a game that not only looked good, but also allowed for you to, I don't know, create your own keep, your own castle, your own house, your own village, your own, you know, place of living. Well, this feature existed in many different games. In the early 2000s, there's a number of games that allowed you to create your own towns, your own cities, your own establishment, build things, create crops or raise crops, fishing, farming, you name it. These are features that have existed in MMOs spanning way back into the early 2000s. Why is it that in 2019 we still let developers get away with what they are calling these days player housing? What I mean by player housing, if you guys can't hear my quotation marks, my air quotes, player housing in reality these days is just another instance that they give to you that allows for you to have maybe a vault or some sort of bank so you can put some things inside of, maybe a cool little area that you can put some more gear in, a couple, you know, places of interest, maybe a chair here, a desk there, chest there, and that's what you get. And in fact, in many cases in games such as Elder Scrolls Online, you have to pay money for this. And I mean money from the cash shop. And Elder Scrolls Online, in some cases, you have to pay dozens of dollars in order to buy player housing. And you think about all the time and effort put into rendering these essentially pre-rendered areas, which, although they look cool, will barely, if ever, be different or unique, right? This looks great, but this is what I call window dressing, right? It looks beautiful. It's got new graphics. It's certainly shiny. It's pretty. But is this really player housing, right? If you're giving me a place to put all my things inside of, you're telling me where I can put them, you're giving me no ability to shape any of the landscape around my house, and then I can't even like build anything on my land itself, and then you're like, all right, here's your house, and I'm like, you mean my prison? Because like, this isn't my house. Locking me inside of an instance and throwing a couple banks and storage facilities in there is not my house. I don't know about you guys, but I have a little bit different of an experience or a definition of what I consider to be a house. And I think my rant today really is just, why are we letting developers get away with such, you know, archaic and frankly speaking, backwards player housing. I remember when player housing being featured in a game was a big thing. It was like a big feature to say, we got player housing, and it was like, wow, like you have player housing? Like Star Wars Galaxies had player housing. WildStar had a big selling point with player housing. These different games that cared so much about, it was because these were places that you could create guilds and have guild meetings. It allowed for you to have more community interactions and have a place to put your things and really just create and build your own world, right? But in 2019, it's almost like we're letting developers get away with these like instances. And I just feel like I'm not really sure why we're letting people get away with it. Burrito Bandits, I realized that WildStar's housing was instance, but WildStar as a game, right? When did WildStar come out? WildStar came out in 2014 and started to be worked on as early as 2008, if I remember correctly. It was in development for like 6 to 7 years. So the point being is, like, relatively speaking, for the time they came out, instance housing wasn't totally out of the question. The reason why I bring up WildStar as another example is WildStar is a newer age of housing where it's instance, but they still give you a great level of customization over your house. So by current theme park standards, WildStar probably has one of the best player housing systems. And I think that it's certainly better than Elder Scrolls Online's. And I think it's a bit silly in 2019 we still have instance housing. I'll be honest. At this point, it's just, I get it if it's tech limitations for your game. Your game just simply doesn't support player housing in any way, shape, or form, or couldn't in any way, shape, or form. Maybe you're just a small scale game. Maybe you just don't have the resources. But man, it's just crazy to think you can look backwards, right, and see better games, better player housing systems to this day, right? And you're talking far back, like early 2000s now. Anarchy Online had player housing. I don't think it had it at launch, but it did eventually. You have to have a pretty hardcore sandbox game to have in-world player housing. I mean, I wouldn't say hardcore, but if you mean like for it to actually not just be a waste of effort, then yeah, you probably do have to flesh it out to a certain extent. Because otherwise, you're just pouring a lot of resources into something that maybe you don't even know if people are necessarily going to use. That's certainly worth mentioning. Arcade was probably the last one to attempt open world player housing. Yeah, Arcade actually, I would say, again, compared to other titles, comparatively to titles that it was competing against, more theme park centric titles, I would say Arcade does a really good job of that. It's really important, I think, to make comparative arguments, because if we don't make arguments relatively speaking, then it's never going to seem fair, if that makes sense. Because you're going to take, you know, old school nostalgic games and say, oh, they had this one really cool system, and then compare it to some current system and be like, see, it's not exactly the same. So then therefore it's not just as good. Well, it's like, well, actually, I'm of the belief that even the old school systems are flawed, right? Everything has a flaw, and gamers are pretty damn good at figuring out flaws. And I just finished my voiceover and editing for the Asheron's Call 1 and 2 video, speaking of which, the death of a game on Asheron's Call 1 and 2, which should be launching next week. Breaking that little bit of news now. But going through that game, it made me realize games that have these great innovative features also in many cases have very glaring flaws. And it's almost because, in spite of their, you know, innovative features, they have these glaring flaws because they spent so much time maybe, you know, focusing on these particular things. Or those particular things end up being kind of like maybe ruined by, say, for example, technical limitations, or in the case of like Star Wars Galaxies and Asheron's Call, macroing. Macroing and botting killed a lot of those systems and kind of ruined them. And so it's just interesting to watch or see the story of Asheron's Call, which is probably one of my favorite stories so far, and see how much is great about it, but how much is also obviously flawed. Conan Exiles, Atlas, Arc Evolved, you can customize and build to suit your needs. Yeah, but see, those games aren't massive multiplayer online games. That's sort of my issue with those games, is that ultimately speaking, there's really no permanence. They can't sell you on permanence because the world isn't large enough to sell you on permanence in most cases, and they can't host enough players on it to sell you on permanence. The one few example that maybe can kind of buck that trend is Minecraft, or maybe their more recent, yet to launch sequel of sorts. Hytale could be possible, or could be capable of running 1,000 people on the same server, which could, in some people's estimations, or by their definition, be a massive multiplayer online game. But I don't know. We'll see, right? Let's jump into the next bit of exciting news, and of course, I'm sure everybody's been wondering about this news for a while now, and finally news came out that confirmed the launch date, none other than Classic WoW. Those who haven't been following the story, World of Warcraft originally launched in 2004 and kind of took the world by storm. It eclipsed EverQuest quite quickly, including EverQuest 2, the sequel to EverQuest 1. It eclipsed just about everything else on the market, and by TBC, and frankly speaking, Wrath of the Lich King had eclipsed 12 million overall subscribers. And whether or not those were Chinese gold sellers, we don't exactly know yet, but those are the numbers that came out when they did. However, following the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, which was Cataclysm, WoW was kind of on a downward trend. It maybe picked up a little bit during Legion and recovered, but kind of spiraled back down after its more recent expansion, Battle for Azeroth, when it wasn't it wasn't a satisfactory expansion for many people. So after all of this, or during all of this drama and all of this stuff unfolding, Classic WoW is kind of like this tiny little idea, this little blimp on the radar, existing on private servers. And every now and then these private servers would get crushed, essentially, like the bugs we are, because we have no protections in that realm. So Blizzard every now and then would send out a couple C&D letters and call it a day, and next thing you know, these big, massive Classic WoW private servers were getting shut down overnight. But what it told us as fans is that there's something there. We keep playing these private servers because there's clearly something there. There's something that we enjoy, something that we still want in that classic experience that's not currently being satisfied right now in the modern experience. And so it started with a question of, why don't you guys just do a classic server, and you can even, lock it behind a subscription fee. People won't mind. And then it was kind of like, people ignored it. Blizzard ignored it. It wasn't really a big deal. And then a guy asked a question at a particular, and I just love showing this. Like, it's such a great example of how you can kind of like the smell of your own fart sometimes when you forget that it's all about the gamers. It's all about the people who play your game. It's about those that are passionate enough to get on stage when they're probably nervous as hell and ask this damn question.
Have you ever thought about adding servers for previous expansions as they were then?
No. And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't. Remember when you had to spam city?
So he goes to talk about some of the more kind of I would say, not redundant, but almost like the more not so fun aspects of Classic WoW. Maybe the parts that could potentially cause attrition. So he uses the worst examples to be like, see, you don't miss this, you don't miss this, which is kind of just as silly as being like, you don't miss Ragnaros, you don't miss Onyxia, and mentioning the greatest aspects. You don't miss Gurabashi Arena, you don't miss Arathi, you know what I'm saying? It's a straw man, this, which is silly why he would make a straw man against, this legion of this legion of dedicated WoW fans who are pretty sharp, by the way. If you guys have been watching these announcements or these BlizzCon stage things, people in the audience ask great questions all the time, and this was one of those. The reason why it was perceived so arrogantly was because essentially people took Alan Brack's kind of nonchalance about this as he was like almost ignoring that the classic WoW community had already existed vanilla WoW community had already existed on private servers for like 10 plus years, and not just existed, but existed in like crazy numbers. We're talking 5,000 plus people on single servers. Like, these are big numbers for a classic a private server, especially one that's operating in the vanilla version of WoW. So anyway, that's my little backstory for those who haven't followed it. But finally, Blizzard announced when Classic WoW would be relaunching, as they finally confirmed it would be relaunching, I think about a year and some change ago. It's going to be officially launching on August 22nd or 27th, and need the different time zones for my European fans and Taiwanese fans and Korean. And what does this one mean? ANZ? Whatever region that is, no shade, but I'm not sure. When is the ANZ? I don't know. I don't know what time zone that is, but Sao Paulo. Yeah, anyway. Whatever region you are, here are the different dates. You can look this up. I'm excited. What more can I say about this? I'm excited because I'm in the process of writing a script about this and putting out a video on this, but the reason why WoW Classic interests me so much is there's just a couple of reasons, actually. A couple simple reasons. One, I like to see things that were old come new again, if that makes sense. Because I like to see how can they hold up in the current market. I mean, that's just almost like that one of those weird things that if you get the chance to see that, it's such a sight to behold. When do you get to see a retro product go up against a current product and see if it's actually comparable and it's going to be successful? Remember when people were saying that WoW wasn't going to be successful? Classic WoW wasn't going to be, that it was just a fad, that it was gonna fail, it's gonna fade out over a couple of days. It's just hype. People don't really want Classic. People don't really care about that. Well, for those who are Twitch savvy, which are probably most of you watching right now, Asmongold, a prominent, probably the most prominent MMO streamer and WoW streamer, broke 100K views on Twitch while streaming, doing a classic dungeon, no, he did a dungeon. He did do a dungeon, right? Didn't he do the mines? What the hell's the name of it? The Dead Mines? Is it Dead Mine? I don't know why I keep thinking. Yeah, it was the Dead Mine stream. Sorry, because I just got done watching his Kalazam one, and then the one that he did with the open world PvP one. Which, oh, actually, you know what? I'll show that one on screen. Welcome to the Dead Mine. Exactly. All right, so here is some footage from Asmongold in closed beta, which, by the way, closed beta is currently running for Classic WoW on like official retail servers. But obviously, it's only for a select few content creators, loyal Blizzard fans, that sort of thing. I don't think I'm in the WoW, universe enough to really be invited to such a thing. But I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I want to do a big launch stream, and I can talk about that now. So we've already mentioned it before. Here, let me go to the exciting part. They had a pretty huge fight. It gets pretty at one point. Oh, there's Tally. Some good old world versus world, alliance versus horde, Here we go. Ooh, getting pelted there. Never go backwards, not even when you're slowed. Anyway. When I see people go backwards, even when they're slowed, it always drives me crazy, because I'm like, I get the idea because you're already slowed, so you're like, I could just go backwards. Yeah, but now you're just going even slower. So it's still never a good idea. This is a pretty crazy fight, and if this is what we can expect, which is going to be what we can expect, by the way, from a Classic WoW launch on a PvP server, I cannot wait. Spend many long hours organizing many long nights and raids on unsuspecting Alliance towns. If you guys are interested in joining, by the way, if you haven't played Classic WoW, if you have, whatever your reasons are, if you just would like a group of people to play with, feel free to join us. We Only PvE. Currently what we're going by. That's going to be my official WoW community, which is going to be joining Horde on a PvP server. RP PvP, please. I still need to make a video about that. But I want to beg Blizzard to make an RP PvP server. Because there's proof that there's demand there, first off. And I want one. Because imagine the amount of content we could make on an RP PvP server. It'd be great. We could create our own factions and things. It'd be awesome. If only we could fight amongst factions as well. Then it'd really be an RP server. I'm just excited, as you guys can tell. And I didn't even finish going over why I was so excited. PvP obviously has me excited. Or old things coming new again has me excited. I mentioned that. The other thing that has me excited is now, no longer can people make the silly, and it's always been a silly argument that, oh, because it's not in the mainstream, it's not successful. They can't make that argument anymore because you can be like, but Classic WoW, but Classic WoW, but Classic WoW. And that's going to be the argument many people are going to make now. Whenever people say, oh, but you can't make, long-term progression games, but Classic WoW. Oh, but you can't make difficult games. Oh, but Classic WoW. And I like that. It's going to be a gotcha argument for a lot of people trying to make progression arguments, anti-spend time to progress arguments, which will make lots of those arguments. And it's not really what MMO fans want, as, to me, really apparent by this relaunch of sorts with Classic WoW. Even just watching the beta unfold and seeing all of the talk about it, it's going to be hilarious, first off, to see so many people it, because they're not used to games being difficult. But it's just interesting also because now you're going to have the next aspiring developers, and even just current developers and publishers and suits and all of these different people in the MMO genre who have some level of influence looking at WoW Classic. They're not going to just la. We're not going to see what WoW Classic does and what its success is, what it means. Like, no, they're going to look at it with open eyes and try and analyze the shit out of it. Why it's working. What's going to happen? What's the future? Could we build off of this? Maybe we can make a game closer to this, right? It's going to have some level of influence. So essentially for me, my only expectation for WoW Classic is, to have a good time, really. That's my expectation, is it's going to be a good time. I'm going to have a good time. I'm going to enjoy myself, and hopefully some of you will enjoy yourself as well. Because one thing's for sure, no matter what happens, something's going to happen. Meaning the market will shift. The market will feel Classic WoW. No matter what, it's going to... Good products can do that. Good games can do that. They can make the whole market, the whole genre feel it. And I think Classic WoW is going to do that. And I can't wait. I can't wait to be streaming an MMO, maybe on a daily basis. We'll see. I'm not even sure yet. But, yeah. Wow, I actually feel excited for the first time for an MMO in some time, because at least, after playing Classic WoW on the private server, I got a couple of characters to over level 15, and I didn't really go higher. I kind of wanted to get to level 30, and then I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do it. And I ended up not playing Horde. I just played Alliance. So I'm kind of keeping the experience mostly fresh for myself. And I think that's kind of what the appeal is to me. And also, hopefully, one of the reasons why people want to watch me play WoW Classic is, why would you watch me play over, say, for example, Asmongold? Well, obviously, besides the reason that he's ginormous and you're not really going to get the best chance to talk to him, besides the normal big versus small, streamer, small content creator type stuff, I think it's more so that I just offer a more outsider's perspective on it all. If you want to hear and watch the WoW launch and really just all the closed beta stuff and maybe all the information concerning the WoW Classic launch, and go get that from a WoW purist, by all means, go to someone like Asmongold, go to like, I don't know, Tips Out, Mad Season Show. There's tons of like, well, I don't know about Tips Out, but Mad Season Show, there's tons of great YouTubers who do WoW-centered content and WoW-focused content. So that's not why you guys come to me. So I figured what's interesting for me is just, I feel almost like a kid in a candy store. Because like, I know that there's candy here, and I'm totally not familiar with it yet, but I get to also kind of experience it as somebody who is almost always on the outside looking in. I was never really caught into the WoW bug. I never really had the WoW bug. I never really was the WoW fan, if you will. If anything, I constantly was railing against the game. I was very negative against the game, in fact. I think probably because I was like bitter when I was younger, that it killed so many games, either directly or indirectly. But obviously, you grow up and you learn that, well, things are better, or they adapt, or they die. That's kind of how it works, right? You wonder how quickly people get sick of those candies? I mean, in what way do you mean by that? Could you quantify what you mean? Because when people ask that question of how long does it take to get sick, I want them to be specific, because I think it's kind of like one of those annoying things to bring up, because people are never specific in their argument. When they say how long is it going to last, like, what do you mean? Because there's a lot of content in Classic WoW already, right? You're at least talking a 1 to 2 years if you're a casual player, and if you're a hardcore player, at least half a year to a year of serious content. Not to mention if you want to make an alt character. So there is a lot there. It's more than just people getting sick of it. I think it's we can ask that question and revisit that question in 2 years' time. You know, maybe in another 2 years. Now we can really ask the question of, are people sick of those candies yet? And maybe they will be. I've said it before. I think the best, foot forward isn't keep Classic classic. That's just my opinion of it. But at the same time, I'm perfectly fine with keeping Classic WoW servers classic, as long as there is some step forward from Blizzard. I would prefer a step forward. And when I say a step forward, I mean, let's not keep the same old, same old. Why don't we get inspired by the old stuff and then maybe make something new? And I realize I can hear all of the angry WoW fans in unison crying about that. I'm not saying they're going to take away your Classic WoW server. I'm just saying that if Classic WoW, or WoW period as an IP, wants to keep living, it can't live forever in past servers, I guess, if you put it that way. What exactly is there? Wait, and more grind for raid gear? Wait, you don't think doing raids or dungeons is content? You don't think doing city raids is content? You don't think doing battlegrounds is content? I'm confused. Getting to a raid in itself takes months of work. So even if there was only one raid, that one raid, if it was, let's say Onyxia, would take people forever to get there. Or if it was a Naxxramas, it would take people forever to get there. So even that, just one raid, is a lot of content. They did come out and say that if Classic is successful and the community wants it, they will make new Classic content. Well, I mean, they didn't say that exactly, but they said that they're open to the idea of it. Basically what you would say. Because they would never close themselves off to the idea. They already tried that and they got yelled at. When they were like, you think you do, but you don't. And then people all like spank them, and then they got in trouble for that. So I don't think they're going to do that anymore. They're going to just hit us with well, wait and see what happens. But I can't help but feel my spider senses going off in regards to my, I guess the perspective that's more business centric within me, that says like, come on, how is Blizzard going to give up this big market share just easily? And when I say give it up, I just mean just let, modern WoW kind of peter out, and then just like bank on maybe the profits coming in steadily from Classic WoW. Eventually that's going to run out. So I don't know. I don't like to have that discussion. that much anymore, because it's one of those that it always ends up in the same place, which is kind of like, we don't know. I guess we're gonna see, you know? But it is interesting to have the conversation for sure, just not when it ends up being kind of like a loop, I guess, if you. If the raid gear and dungeons aren't content, then BFA isn't much. Nah, I do not count grinding like a zombie content. I did back then. Hell no, I'll do that. I think you mean again. Can you describe what grinding like a zombie content means? I'm curious what that means. Because in what game do you grind as a zombie? Because if anything, that's current games. Current games are way more zombie grind like than I've ever seen in games before. Will your hat work as a flying disc? You know what? Question. I don't know. I'll have to try that out. Probably. It's a nicer hat though. I don't know if I want it to end up on the ground. For me, a raid isn't content. It's just a thing that I have to do in order to get better gear. Wait, so what do you? Okay, let's have that discussion then. What do people consider content then? I'm curious what people's definitions of content are. It seems I might have a different view than many people. I have a very literal definition for content. Content to me is literally anything that's created by the developers themselves for me to essentially partake in. That's content to me. If that was just Hat Wars, like a I don't know, a hat mini game, that would still be content, even if I thought it was shitty content. Well, Ludens, unfortunately, I grew up with many people who I would play MMOs with who would always get annoyed whenever we would grind, and I would always be like, okay, how are we going to get to the max level if we don't level? Oh, well, I don't want to have to like kill monsters over and over again. Okay, let's do some quests. I don't want to have to run around from point to point and turn things in. Okay, let's PvP. Damn, I'm getting destroyed over and over again by these guys. I don't want to level up in Battlegrounds. So, do you just not want to level up? Like, you just not want to play an MMO? Like, if that's the argument, then yeah, maybe you shouldn't play. You don't want to level. Leveling is kind of I would say, a integral part of being an adventurer. Original idea behind an MMO, right? Pen and paper? What do you think will happen if Classic WoW doesn't take off? When you say take off, what do you mean? Because like the reason why I keep asking you guys questions in return to your questions is not to be annoying or pedantic. It's because when somebody asks the question, what do you think will happen if it doesn't take off? It's improbable, nearly impossible it wouldn't take off. And what I mean by that is it's going to be successful. That's not an argument. It will be successful. Now, we can have an argument as to how long it will be successful. Will it fade out quickly? Will it fade out within a year, 2 years, 3, however many years? We can have that discussion. But it's already proven on private servers, when it first launched, recent, hoopla and hype over the whole Classic WoW closed beta. I mean, clearly it's going to be successful commercially. So for me, the question is more so, what then? Then what do they do with that? Are they just going to kind of leave that? Are they going to muck it up? What are they going to do with that level of success once it happens? That's kind of, I think, what my thoughts are on that matter. And then if your question is, what do I think will happen if it doesn't take off at that point? I mean, I think it'll kind of just slowly peter into existence, just like most MMOs. I mean, Classic WoW has a higher chance to survive than Modern WoW. And I think the reason is because with Modern WoW, once you're no longer able to bring in new players, the old school players are more likely to want to play the old school content, if you think about it. At least they're going to want access to the old school content. Because at that point, why just play the original content when it's kind of, in some people's eyes, maybe an easier or more bastardized version of the game, or whatever your argument is. I think Classic WoW will be great once a month or two passes. That's when the buzz will fizzle and the game should be stabilized to a core community. Yeah, Alandris, I think that's kind of what has me a little bit frayed about joining a PvP server, is kind of the toxicity of the community. I prefer RP PvP servers because on RP PvP servers, typically PvPers are more so, in my experience, adults. So they're more willing to, like, sure, there's shit talk, but you shit talk in character, essentially. So it's not, hey, go get cancer, go, like, you know, go die in a fire kind of thing. It's more of like a, Loktar, I'm going to turn your skull into a decoration ornament, but in the nicest way possible from an orc perspective. So it's a little bit different. Any activity in a game that contributes to player fun or progression in regards to the content question. Okay. I suppose today people expect something like Guild Wars 2 every month, quite a big amount of new content. We want new content, not the same old bullshit grind. Games have been doing the same old grind in each. Yeah, so I think I kind of understand what you're saying here. And if my opinion isn't abundantly made clear already, or hasn't been abundantly made clear already, I'm always pushing toward the forward, like the future. Like, I want better than what was previously done. So why didn't I like WoW back whenever I was playing other MMOs? The simple reason is I believe that the questing in WoW was quite formulaic. I believed it was boring, and frankly speaking, I never really gave it a chance. So when I went back and played it on a private server, I realized the biggest part of my problem was I was rushing through the game. Nothing else. I was rushing through the game. I was rushing through the dialogue. There was lore there. There was some dialogue. Yes, are the quest objectives kind of like boring? Is it still killing 5 boars sometimes? Absolutely. And those are fetch quests. Those do exist. And yes, I want questing to be better than that now. But the argument with Classic WoW isn't to make it better. It's Classic WoW. It's not even in the discussion. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, so Classic WoW coming out isn't an indictment on there not being new levels of questing or new types of grinding. It's more that whatever is currently in rotation is not adequate. And that's been proven, right? People are seeking more longer-term progression. They don't want everything to be easy to get. They actually want some level of difficulty. People are actually seeking consequence. They want consequence because they realize it's required in order to have the best kind of world. So that's kind of my opinion on it. I feel like I'm very much staunchly into the, I want to learn from our past mistakes and push forward. But whenever you have a classic launch of a server, in this case Classic WoW, it's different because it's not asking you to look forward. It's actually asking you to look back. But that's not where it stops. Most people will just look back and be like, wow, WoW Classic, this is great. This is what I wanted. Most people will have that kind of like expression toward it. I think the more, at least for those who are interested in developing games and those who are still interested in the MMO genre, the better attitude to have is we're looking back so we can better yet go forward. Right? It's almost like, okay, so MMOs started on this idea of pen and paper, of creating characters, of creating adventures, of questing together. And then they put it into a text-based game. And then they put the text-based game into a 3D game or a 2D game. And then the 2D game was put into a 3D game. And then boom, 2004, you have WoW launch, right? And it's this big, crazy, successful game. And it changed so many different paradigms and different aspects of the way things were done before. But that doesn't mean that the way things were done before was wrong. And this is what I constantly struggled with back as a youngling because I didn't have the brain power nor the fedora yet to argue with people whenever they would say, yeah, but WoW's more successful, so your game sucks. And I'd be like, yeah, right. Less people play my game. No one cares about my game. But then I always thought to myself too, no, but WoW's good, but this isn't the best aspect. The fetch questing isn't the best aspect. Killing 5 boars isn't the best aspect of the game. So I didn't like that people looked at it with such rose-colored glasses even back then. You know, they weren't willing to call out the flaws, that some quests are boring, that some zones are barren and unfinished, that relying so much on developer-made content without allowing more tools for player content hamstrings their game, in my opinion, for no reason. Like, WoW, why doesn't WoW just come out with a couple different tools to allow role players or even just community, leaders to create more content? It's not that difficult to do. It isn't, right? Unless their system is really just that difficult to change, right? But like to bring up an example is we've seen garrisons, we've seen them do things where you can customize things. We've seen them add new lands and new zones that have world objectives to them and things can affect and change, and zones can flip and things like that. So they have the capabilities of doing it. So I guess for me, the interesting thing with classic WoW, it starts at, oh wow, here's this classic idea. Let's see if it can hold up in modern day. But also, here's why it worked before. Let's pay attention to that. That's what I'm paying attention to. So when some people maybe see the whole classic WoW, they just think, oh, hype job, oh, overhyped, oh, people don't really want it, oh, it's gonna, what is it gonna be after a year or two? No one's gonna care. I'm looking at it more of like, well, now people are going to see it on the stage again, and so they're going to know now. It's almost like they see the future. Because you have classic WoW and then you have modern WoW. So we know where we started and where it worked and where it was great. And then where it slowly started to lose maybe some of its better aspects. And we can look at it almost like an archaeologist. Like if you think about it, we can pick up this relic that's classic WoW and be like, huh, they did it this way and that way, this and that. There's flaws here, but this is also a really strong aspect. Then we can look at modern WoW and be like, well, when you compare it here, when you add this patch or this system or this feature, it changes this aspect of the game. And it's never going to be 100% a science, but you can use that comparison to kind of maybe lead the way forward. That's kind of my view of it. I think people are freaking out too much about the content of classic WoW. When current patch is all that ever mattered after TVC, all old content is just for transmog and the occasional mount now. I don't really know if that's true though. People seem to very fondly remember classic WoW content, even the dungeons. But the content is same on every game and nothing is new content. Maybe they can make a new game with different ways to MMO like EverQuest did. Yeah, but that's not what's happening. So like I guess we can have an idealistic conversation of should they, maybe they could, what if, those kinds of arguments. But the reality is classic WoW is coming out, so I'd rather just have the discussion about kind of how that's going to change things. If they should have done it a different way, because I already agree. I would already prefer a sequel, classic game. But at this point, I'm happy for a classic game because I know it's going to make change happen. No matter how it happens, change is going to happen. Technically, you can speak to the other faction, but I guess it's not, it's not cut and dry. What is a grind for me? So, I've spoken about this on the podcast before, and an update about it, actually. Rippy's brought up an idea that I had, funny enough, that I had thought about and kicked about a couple of times, but just never thought it would really work. And we would joke about it, of course, a couple of times in Discord, which is like the idea of doing like a series maybe where you explain certain ideas and you explain like what a genre means, what a term means, and almost like historically talk about it, talk about how it's used today, talk about how it was originally used and that sort of thing. And this is sort of one of those things I think it would be really helpful with, because then we can kind of have the discussion of like, what does grind mean? Because what grind initially meant to me was grind was typically described as Asian MMOs. So as a young boy, whenever I would play a game, the games that were described as grindy were typically Asian-centric MMOs. In these Asian-centric MMOs, the reason why they were perceived as grindy is they are grindy. They are more grindy. It's part of the culture. They design their games differently. So for me, the idea of grind was just essentially doing the same thing over and over again to slightly increase my power level. And that sounds pretty general, right? Most people could use that as a definition to describe leveling. But where grinding was different for me, and again, this was how I use the definition. Grinding was different for me because it was a negative connotation. The negative connotation was that there was no content, meaning there was no questing, there was no dungeons, there was no other way to level except just killing mobs. And so that's why Ion gets a lot of flack as a game, is because early on in the game, there was nothing to do except just farm mobs in certain areas. And so that's literally just grinding, right? And some people are totally fine with that. And many games have that, including games that also have questing systems. But that's kind of how I described it whenever I was younger, with like the idea of, if there's no other way for me to level here besides just killing the same dude over and over again, that's a grind. But I know people use the term a lot more loosely, and it's not so negatively connotated as I used it originally, I guess I should say. I wish they wouldn't release classic content in the same order again. They have the chance to basically create an alt. Wow. I would say that's just realizing the basic quest forms. Go here, deliver this, and any others I can't think. I'm a simple man. I just want someone in awesome, or I just want to see someone in awesome armor know that they earned that through gameplay, not by inserting their credit card. I'm the same way. That was a big thing that I liked about Guild Wars 1, in fact. Guild Wars 1, whenever somebody had faction armor, you know they slaved to get that. That's basically what the game was, right? Costume Wars. It still is. Guild Wars 2 is still the same. It will be great if Classic is really successful. Many developers may actually look at what was good back then and possibly start changing their ways. That's sort of my views on it as well, to be honest. Oh, also, thank you for the resub card, by the way. Here's your Fedora tip, man. But who cares about the same old WoW questing storyline? All people will rush to the game. They want to be the first of everything. They want to PvP, so they have to rush to get the best gear as possible. I don't really think that's the case. I think people used to think that was the case, as people kept saying it over and over again. So people almost like kept willing it into existence. Oh, MMOs are just a rush to the finish line. And then developers were like, oh, MMOs are a rush to the finish line? Okay, let's make MMOs just the finish line. And so they only made MMOs the finish line. But that's actually why people like Classic WoW so much. Because the end game isn't just the finish line. Getting there is quite a journey in itself. And having, you know, now leveled 3 characters past level 15 in Classic WoW, like, it certainly is a journey. Like, that alone, I probably spent more time on those 3 characters than I would spend on one character in most games getting to level, like, 60. You know what I'm saying? Like, hitting a max level. It took me more time in that. I think if I looked at my days played, it was multiple days. Multiple days played. So, I mean, you think about that and you're just like, if somebody wants to join Classic WoW already knowing how it's structured and just rush through the content just to get the best things for whatever reason, there's no ranking system early on. There's no fact, like, what reason do you have other than to be the world first guy in rating? Maybe if you want to be that. But if you want to be that, then there's servers and communities that you can join for that. The problem is that a good portion of people who are interested in classic WoW are actually interested in it just because of the leveling experiences and the PvP experience. So in reality, those two experiences don't really reward people who just rush to the end. So I will be streaming my experience through the max level, and I plan on getting at least characters to max level. So at least I hope to be proof and living proof that people can still enjoy leveling up and playing with their friends in MMOs and not having to play at some breakneck speed in order to enjoy a game. Because that frankly, that shit needs to die. Because while it can exist and it should exist, what I mean by die is I mean the rhetoric surrounding it, that every game is that way. I just hate when people say that, because it's just, you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy by saying everyone is just going to rush to the end of the game. You're telling developers, hey, only make end, don't make early game, don't make early game, and then everyone's like, okay, and everyone just rushes to the end game, and then we continue to get these really shitty, you know, pre, early, and then mid game experiences. There's no innovation since the jump since Ultima Online to EverQuest. That's just not true. Like, I get that people really like the classic experience. I get that you might like EverQuest 1 or Ultima Online a lot, but it's just simply not true to say that other people haven't innovated on the quest model. In fact, there's many examples of innovating on the quest model. And in fact, one of the best examples is another game you didn't even mention, which is Asheron's Call, which also came out during that time. I would probably say that they had a lot of innovation put into the quest model as well. And then you have more recent games. People want to rag on SWTOR, and I'm the first to do that, but it also had some pretty damn good questing and pretty damn good storylines. Also, we can talk about other questing experiences and other games, such as like more so new games that are not even out yet, like Project Gorgon and Grenskaya, Secret Worlds. What are some other more? Shadow the Avatar. Those are the best examples I can think of right now. But I just think it's helpful to say, hey, old games did this well, and old games did this really well. But I don't think it's helpful to speak in hyperbole and be like, oh, nobody did it better than the old school games. Where it's like, I mean, that could be debatable. I think it could be debatable. Warhammer, for example, Asheron's Call probably is one of the first MMOs to really push emergent gameplay. Warhammer Online is probably one of the first games to push public questing. And then you have Guild Wars 2 now, and just about everybody else make public questing a very normal part of their game. Sorry, Tabula Rasa came before Warhammer. And Tabula Rasa also had technically some sort of public questing system. So I forgot to mention Tabula Rasa. So there's Asheron's Call, Tabula Rasa, and then Warhammer. And public questing is an innovative mechanic that was not worked on by EverQuest, nor pioneered by Ultima Online. That's another example. I get that you might be speaking in hyperbole, by the way, but just remember that this kind of is my job. So whenever people speak in hyperbole sometimes, for me, I have a hard time remembering that they're speaking in hyperbole. I just think that they're just like saying something wrong. I don't know if that sounds really like arrogant or something. Just make a new MMO that pushes the envelope, even if it's a big risk. It's no problem. Hey, let's do it. Ludens, you want to make an MMO? Apparently, a lot of people in that region want to make an MMO. So why don't we get that grant from, what's that place over there in the Nordic region? That something Guild Association. People mention it in the comments, but apparently they always give grants to video game companies. The one in Sweden. Aren't they the ones that gave Ragnar Turnquist his grant for his first game? Something Writers Association. I can't remember what the Screenwriters Association. I don't know. It was like some like weird association, but they for some reason always like invest in video games. I'm afraid that what worked 15 years ago might not work today. Gaming has changed. Simple as that. So, okay, I figured that was your opinion, Gardener, and now I'm gonna have to bust you. So this opinion of, I'm afraid it's not going to work, is so silly. I'm tired of this opinion. Can people eradicate this from their minds? The is it not going to work argument does not work with classic WoW. It's already been working. It's been existing on private servers for over a decade. The private servers have more population than entire games. So, like, I'm just so tired of the rhetoric of it's not going to work. It's already been working. Classic servers have already existed for a long time. Star Wars Galaxy's emulator has been running for over a decade. So, I just, sorry, it's one of my pet peeves when people say classic servers don't work. Or they're afraid if they're not going to work. They've already been working. They've always worked. People like classic games that are, you know, great games, great experiences. City of Heroes, Star Wars Galaxies, World of Warcraft, EverQuest, Asheron's Call. Though Asheron's Call, unfortunately, doesn't really have a well-known, prominent emulator experience. Oh, you don't have to apologize for unsubbing, man. It's fine, dude. I wish Arcade would get all the hype that WoW Classic is getting. I think the biggest problem with Arcade is its world, which is actually probably the greatest strength of WoW. I think the reason why Arcade or a game like Arcade won't ever get the same reception of WoW is because WoW is fondly remembered because of its lore. The lore is what makes you remembered. Like, gameplay experiences are certainly important, and I'm sure anybody can tell you that Jedi Academy is a great game. But one of you guys in chat right now, and I'm putting you on the spot, one of you guys tell me what the main villain's name is in Jedi Academy. I'll wait. None of you guys know it. Okay, did you Google that? All right, we got two correct answers. The point being is, it's like a really obscure name that most people who didn't play the game over and over again, like I did, would even know Marco Ragnos, or even know him as like some Sith Lord who has his own tomb on Korriban and all that stuff. My point being is, not a lot of people are gonna remember that. Sorry, I'm scrolling down. Apparently, I was pretty far back. But yeah, not a lot of people are going to remember that. But you're damn sure going to remember the physics in that game and the combat and how cool the gameplay was, and force pushing off stormtroopers off of things, and playing Kal Katarn and Jedi Outcast and Academy, creating your own character, and, you know, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're going to remember the gameplay. With WoW, the reason why it's so memorable is because the Warcraft lore. I mean, come on, guys. It's the lore, it's the world. They took the time to, first off, build and flesh out this world with the RTS games, which I played 1 and 2. I'm one of those weird young kids who actually had the ability and chance to play Warcraft 1 and 2. And I remember how weird kids would look at me whenever they'd be like, "Oh, I love Warcraft 3." And I was like, "Warcraft 3, huh?" I never really played much of Warcraft 3. Be like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, I just played StarCraft mostly. I played a lot of Warcraft 2, though." People just look at me like I was like the strangest person ever, and I'm just like, I liked Warcraft 2 better. That's my deal with it. That's just my opinion. I like Warcraft 2 better than Warcraft 3. I know I'm weird. I can't help it. I could probably help it a little bit. The most interesting thing to me is how classic dungeons were really intense. You had to be careful with the pools. You had to take your time and be ready for wipes. You had to explore these weirdly laid out spaces packed with people and things that felt almost lived in. I'll add on to that as well, that you especially had to be careful with pools whenever you're trying to get to the end of the dungeon, to get to the boss in a particular zone. You really had to be careful, because if you were not careful, you didn't just wipe yourself, you wiped the whole group. That's kind of how it should be, right? It's group content after all. I remember back in high school when my friend was showing me Persona, he was saying that you had to grind levels. Oh yeah, Persona was super grindy back then. I think Persona 4 or 3, if I remember correctly, is one of the more grindy ones. What are some key points that you think should be taken into consideration when developing an engaging quest system for today's audience? I think the most important things are going to be learning from great quest systems such as RuneScape, Asheron's Call. Those two are the best examples to me of nailing the idea that questing has to be out in the world. Like questing, Secret World does it great too, but those games do it a little bit better. But questing needs to be out in the world. Like questing can't just be talking to an NPC and killing 5 like squirrels right next to the city. You know, questing has to be about being on an adventure, at least to some extent. It should feel like there's at least a little bit of ingenuity as well, at least in some quests, like maybe some basic puzzling. I'd like to see more puzzles in MMOs. I think the Secret World does a good job with doing puzzles. So that I would like to see more puzzles. I would like to see questing being more involved out there in the world, as I said, having more reason to be out there in the world. Because oftentimes you just go to a city, somebody gives you a quest, and then you go to an area that's designated, right? And that's kind of how it goes. And yes, some questing should work that way. I'm totally fine with some quests working that way. Maybe like a quest board or a job board or something like that could just give you like basic questing like that. But I much prefer the idea that whenever you find out about a quest, it's either about you asking about it. Say, for example, in Morrowind or Elder Scrolls games where you have to kind of ask about rumors. I'd prefer it to be something like that. Or you have to say a keyword like an EverQuest. Or maybe even just one of those things like in Asheron's Call, where you just have to find the object itself. And when you find this like unique object, you kind of have to like put the pieces together where it goes. And maybe somebody in town was asking about this particular object. You find it and you just /give it to them. And then boom, it starts the quest right then and there. Instead of being so like formulaic and being checklist gameplay has kind of ruined the MMO genre, in my opinion. We've talked about this before. But like checklist-based gameplay. The idea of like, I've killed 4 rats, now to go get 1 rat head. When it's just like, wait, I already killed 4 rats, why don't I have 4 rat heads? Like, why do I have to kill 5 rats to get 1 rat head? Or there's other things where it's just like, okay, you are the savior and destroyer of all beings. Can you go collect 5 goat pelts, please? Like, you're telling me I hit max level, I got all of this badass raid gear, and I'm on rat duty? I'm still killing zebras and skunks and horses? Like, what are we doing here? Where's the epic shit? Where's the dynamic event where the bear attacks like a local town and he scales up to like some ginormous size because he hasn't been dealt with before? Tried. Hasn't really been like finished out yet, I guess I should say. You know what? You're the exact kind of guy we need. Be here, you're the Dragonborn. You're the Dragon Slayer. You're the King Slayer, and you're the God Slayer. So we have the perfect job for you. Can you mop the toilets, please? I'll give you 500 XP. And I'll give you a token, daily token, while you're at it. Thanks, sport. Hey, make sure to use hot water this time. Thanks, man. I remember him as the blue guy that some used. Yeah, exactly. It's so funny, like in Jedi Knight, we used to just use like the most absurd characters. And like especially like the best players on the server were always like the dumbest characters. Like whenever I was in my heyday, I guess I would always play Tusken Raider or you just like the dumb characters where you're just like, why are you Tusken Raider? But that's exactly why I played Tusken Raider. I was a little kid. And so whenever people be like, why are you Tusken Raider? I'd be like, 'cause I'm not supposed to be. And I'm a Jedi. But people really like that. There's so many different character models in that game. It made it really fun to replay maps over and over again with different characters and different emotes. I thought Jedi were supposed to be a challenge. The MMO community ruined MMOs. Butcher about travel and time it takes to make a dungeon group. Bam, dungeon finders. Bitched about taking. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's fair to completely blame people who complain, because remember, when people complain, they're complaining because there's an actual issue. Just because you complain, however, doesn't mean that the solution that you get is going to be the solution that you either want or is the best solution. So sometimes you fix a problem, but have you ever heard that saying that you cut off your nose to spite your face? It's kind of one of those things where sometimes you think you fix a problem, but in reality, you had no idea that you created a far greater problem. And sometimes people can only figure this out, after all, since we're talking about people here. Anthropology, or the study of people, is very difficult to do, and it's hard to have very good psychological studies and such because of this, because double blind studies are very hard to set up, right? If you want to have some really good like anthropological study, you would need like a double blind study at least, and it's pretty difficult to get such a thing. So it's also difficult to judge how a community or a world would work, right? Unless you have a number of years to study it. So it's like, in a way, MMOs are tragic in that they almost have to screw up and fail for other games to kind of learn, right? Kind of has to go that way. Whereas, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines can come out, be an utter shit show because it's totally unfinished, but then get a number of community patches and kind of be like good to go, even though it was completely done by its community. With a massive multiplayer online game, you have to pay for the servers to run. You have to pay to host the IP in most cases. It's very unlikely that you're even going to get access to the game, to even have the source code and all of that sort of stuff. Job's done. Zug. Job's done. Job's done. That's my best imitation. Would love to see Jedi Academy, a remake with updated engine or expanded upon. I would too, man. I would too. Let's see what this this new I'm already forgetting the damn name. What's that new Star Wars game that's supposed to come out? Fallen Order. I'm hoping Fallen Order is more like Jedi Academy than it's more like Battlefront. The more recent Battlefront. Warcraft's 2 personality was off the charts. The music, the sound effects, the quests. Warcraft 3 did not measure up. What I liked the most about Warcraft 2 was I liked the very green orc. I liked like the very green orcs. I liked that you had like the very clear differences and factions. I also liked the death animation, and you like see like the blood on the ground and shit. Like, it was a more bloody and grim dark game, I felt like, in regards to like maybe violence and stuff like that and the way it's portrayed. But I'd say that the overall plot is more mature in Warcraft 3 for sure. There's more like betrayal and these other dark kind of insidious beliefs in there, and the Forsaken and stuff. It's probably darker overall, but I don't know. Warcraft 2 felt more mature to me, and it's probably just the way it looks. I was a sucker for the old school style of art for Warcraft. I still remember the ogre mages and what was the other guys? There was the ogre mage, the griffins, the dude who flew on the dudes who flew on griffins. That dates me, doesn't it? Man, that seems like a long time ago. I feel like Skyrim would have been much better if you weren't the Dragonborn. I would agree. Especially because the Dragonborn shit just kind of seems like thrown in there. In the old expanded Star Wars universe, there was a Tusken Raider Jedi Master. You'll have to send me a source for that. As a Star Wars expanded universe nerd myself, it's very likely there's some big catch there. Like he was Tusken or was like adopted or something. It's gonna be like some weird like catch. Because I mean, I'm pretty sure they're slavers, so it seems like unlikely they would be like Jedi. They would have their own Jedi. Speaking of Star Wars, have you seen the Mandalorian TV show promos? I've seen a couple of them, and like, I don't know if you guys know this, but Mandalorians are my favorite. Like, I love Mandalorians. I love Mandalorians. They're probably one of my favorite factions in all of Star Wars, period. That being said, what is my opinion, or what are my thoughts of the upcoming Mandalorian show that's supposed to come out? I'll tell you, look, here's my opinion of, or my expectations of most Star Wars movies or shows. I'm going to go in. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to try and be as entertained as possible. And then after, I'll take the time to critically analyze it. But when I first go into it, I go in as just a normal fan. Like, I'm just trying to enjoy it. I just want to be like the regular dude just enjoying it. So I don't like to have a whole lot of preconceived notions of things. I haven't read any reviews or any leaks or anything like that. So my knowledge right now is pretty much fresh, and I don't like to watch a whole lot of trailers. So I will talk about it whenever it's out for sure, and I'll let you guys know. Will I make a video on it? I don't really know if that's my lane. I will talk about it for sure. Subvert your expectations. I saw that. Fallen Order looks bad. I wish you could character customize. I mean, I don't really care about character customization as much if you make a good contained story. But if you don't, and you make me hate my character, or at least dislike my character, kind of like my problem with The Force Unleashed was I wasn't really like a fan of the main character. He just kind of seemed kind of boring to me, a placeholder. So I can't really play games if I think the main character is boring. Have I seen Clone Wars? Yeah. I'm gonna have an unpopular opinion about Clone Wars. In fact, this will be my last opinion before I move to the call-in segment. So while I'm making this unpopular opinion, feel free to ask me any question in chat. You can @ me in chat. We have a little bit of time, so you can @ me in Discord if you'd like to. We have about maybe 20 minutes or so. If you'd like to ask me a question in Discord, feel free to join the discord.gg/nerdslayer. You can ask me a question about just about anything. If you don't have time to join the podcast lobby and ask me a question, however, using voice, then you can also just @ me in chat. Also @ me in chat, and I will get to your question. Yeah, if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask me in a call-in, anything you've been preparing, I need to start asking you guys more questions, because people haven't been so excited to call in now. I feel like because I leave it at the end. Maybe I need to do a couple. Will I live stream react to E3 streams? You know what? I'm thinking about it. My problem with doing things like that is I don't like to come across as very smug. And I know it might seem funny because I get accused of being smug because people listen to my voiceovers and somehow psychoanalyze me. I'm not particularly someone who likes being smug. So typically I don't like doing reaction things because they come across as being smug. I mean, you guys see, like, even whenever I do trailer reactions with you guys, I don't typically like doing them. But I just do them anyway because I know people want me to. I'll try it. You know what? I'll try it. I'll think about it. Because I've covered the show before. I've been on the floor. So maybe I have some insight other people don't have. And all of that sort of stuff. But I don't even know if I would have the time to do such a thing, or if I would want to do it. But I guess it could be successful for me, like monetary-wise. So it could be a good reason for me. I don't know. We'll see. That's a good question. You have something to call in, Lemposs? All right. Join the podcast lobby. I'll drag you in. Here's a link for Sharad Het. Okay. Go. He was right. He's a real character. What universe was he? Rise of the Empire. Wait a minute. Isn't Rise of the Empire what I think? Okay. That's actually, sorry. I thought the Rise of the Empire was before Darth Bane, but it's after. So Darth Bane is... No, it says right here, he sired a son and he continued to lead the Tuscans. Till the Jedi sent a representative to retrieve him. Huh. Interesting. Apparently his father ended up becoming Darth Krayt. Pretty damn interesting. Cool, thanks for that, man. I appreciate it. You learn something every day. Do you think streamers like Asmongold or Tips Out are going to ruin the classic WoW experience? You might have to explain that one a little bit. What do you mean by ruin the experience? Do you mean like yeah, I guess by you mean like make it negative to people? I don't know. I guess I'd have to. All right, so Lemposs has a question, so he's gonna call in right now. Let's drag him in. Hey, what's up, Lemposs?
Oh, hey.
All right, what's your question?
There we go. Well, it was more of a thought that I had when you talked about names appearing in MMOs, like over players. I sort of had a thought about that because not only is it like it prevents flanking, it prevents you from having to actually recognize enemies. Like you can just see it in the distance. His name is Red. He's an enemy. But then I had some more thoughts about it. And that was actually to do with factions and how that sort of interacts. Because if you give a name to something, you start to hate, you can sort of hate that thing. You can hate the name, you can hate the player behind that name. But if you remove the name, suddenly it's only the race or the faction that you start to hate. And I sort of thought about how that sort of could be, well, not implemented, but how that sort of functions together in a faction.
Yeah, so you're saying like so nameplates is where we started, right?
Yeah, essentially.
But you're saying that maybe it's not the best to, so you're sorry, I didn't get the beginning. Did you say that you didn't want to have a nameplate system where you can see someone from afar, or you do like that part?
Well, I'm not sure what I actually like. It was just a thought about it.
Okay.
That if you don't have the nameplate, there's not something recognizable. Like there's not a name, there's not a character. It's just an enemy. And how that sort of plays into factions, or the factions in an MMO. Because suddenly, if there's no name, if there's no guild, then it's just an orc. It's just the enemy. And how that sort of plays into, well, yeah, how the sort of wars in a MMO function.
Huh, that actually, I kind of see what you're saying. I've brought this up before. It's interesting where you think about in like I think I was talking to my girlfriend about this, but you talk about the way like social interactions work in the real world, and you know, you can't really choose if somebody talks to you or not, right? Like mostly you can, but sometimes people can just talk to you in proxy, or maybe they just come up to you and talk to you. When you think about MMOs, and in an MMO, whenever you approach somebody, you know a lot about them before you even really talk to them. And that's actually an important thing. You're right, it is an important thing. Because that's the original idea behind creating class customization, or like class, I should say identity, in the original like Dungeons and Dragons, right? Each class has its own identity, therefore it looks its own way. So whenever you see a druid, he's not dressed in, you know, ironclad armor and, you know, head to toe, and has no pet with him, like, because that's not really how they look. So you have like a certain expectation, and I think that yeah, like without a name tag, you sort of only have whatever you can glean by looking at somebody. But my idea isn't completely get rid of the name tag. it's keep a name tag, but make it to where you actually have to make a vision check in order to see their name. And what I mean by like a vision check is I mean like within a certain radius, if your character has the ability to perceive that person, like, you know, let's say it's a sight radius of 500 meters, whatever it is, then you can see their tag. But let's say if you have, maybe you're not as gifted, you have worse sight, maybe you can only see it at 250. So it could make sight an actual skill in the game. And it could also make it to where having somebody who's a scout that has a high level of sight could actually be useful because you'd need them to spot people to see if they're enemies or not. But here's another thing. You have things like tabards, right? You can introduce tabards and guild cloaks and all this other stuff to create more, I guess, like uniformness. So it helps you know who's on your team, who's not on your team. But I guess other than that, the faction thing that you mentioned, that's been done before. I think Guild Wars 2 does that, doesn't it?
Well, that's just colors. I do think you can see. Actually, no, I don't think you can see that name.
No, I don't think you see their name.
They're
I'm
just
pretty sure.
called Invader.
Yeah, it says something Invader, and it's like a red name or whatever. So I think that's a big reason why I don't like it. It feels so faceless.
Oh,
You're
okay.
just killing random people.
Well, I just thought from the perspective of sort of not defacing, but sort of removing any personality to the enemy, because it sort of reflects real life. You don't get to ask what the name of your opponent is.
Exactly. That was the point I was trying to make.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, that's exactly the point I was trying to make, was like, in real life, like if we approach each other, we have to like glean information and like talk to each other and learn about each other and actually have a conversation. In an MMO, you almost have a little bit of an innate advantage, right? Because you see their class, you see like maybe their gear. You have some level of idea who they are. But it's important that we don't make it to where you just know everything about their character just because it's all clearly outlined for you. You know, like, I don't think that should be how it is. And I know some games have that. They make it quite clear. You can see everything about that player, like in terms of like their race, their class, their spec, their this, their that. I much prefer whenever I look at a player, I don't necessarily know what he is, but I can either ask him or I can watch him. I don't know. I just prefer that myself.
Yeah. Well, I think, well, I did also have the sort of opposite thought about it, and that was to do with being infamous. Because without a name, if you're going around killing everyone in PvP, if you don't have a name, they don't really have anything to associate that with. Meaning your efforts are somewhat meaningless. Like, you don't make that reputation for yourself. And that's sort of the opposite of that argument, that, or is in opposition to that, what I mentioned first. That suddenly it becomes personal, not impersonal.
Yeah, no, that's actually a good point. And that's kind of why, you know, EVE Online is the way it is. Let's just be honest. Like, when conflict is a big part of your game, there's going to be a lot of, you know, other things that come with conflict, right? There's going to be subterfuge and spies and thieves and hackers and all that. You know, it's going to be a crazy affair whenever conflict is a main focus. So I think, yeah, it kind of is an inevitable thing whenever conflict is a main focus. You just, like I said, you just look at EVE Online and it's just, that is the game, basically.
I mean, I'd prefer not to.
Well, I don't blame you from a gameplay perspective, as I've mentioned many times. But was that all the questions that you had?
It was just a sort of to share some thoughts.
Well, no, I appreciate it, and also I should say that that's something that I wish. I'd probably say that's one of my bigger pet peeves with MMOs. It sounds so silly because it doesn't seem like a big deal to many people. Nameplates, but I really think that nameplates, so commonly and so like egregiously being public knowledge, is not a good thing. I think that there's more interesting ways to handle it. And that's just my thoughts on it.
I would agree on that, to some extent at least. I mean, it does have some purpose as well, especially with, as I mentioned, like famous or infamous. If you see the name nerdSlayer popping over the horizon over an orc, and it's like you've heard rumors of them, a great nerdSlayer who slayed all the Alliance players in this zone, you're gonna be running for the hills suddenly. You can't do that to the same extent if there is no name. So I think there's value to both, to some extent.
Well, yeah, and just to clarify, I'm not saying there shouldn't be nameplates.
No,
okay.
I got that.
I'm just making sure because Alundris made a good point in chat. He said that it would be cool if your nameplate becomes more visible the higher rank you get. Maybe you become like legendarily known to your enemies, and you become more like prevalently seen because it like that's actually a really cool idea, and
that it is.
And it's funny, like some random comment like on a fucking podcast at 12:55 p.m. my local time, and it's a good idea. So my point is that if one of you guys can do it at some random time in the middle of the day, I'm sure some developer with money or at least resources can figure that out.
Yeah, but they also work under the premise that on the time, it's like a time scale, have certain resources. Like, I'm sure they also come up with a lot of great ideas that we never see.
That's true.
Actually, we do see, or not see, but they tell us about them, and it's just well, we can't implement it. We don't have the time, we don't have the resources, we can't because of tech. I mean, Guild Wars was very much, what do you call it, victim of that. Like, they had a lot of great ideas, just couldn't really perform on them.
Yeah, and I think once they figured that out, they did the right thing and the smart thing, which was just kind of change their focus. I never blamed them for that. I was always hard on Guild Wars 2, sorry, just primarily because of what was promised, you know, and then also I had such high expectations coming from the previous game. But anyway, yes, thanks for stopping by, Lemposs. I appreciate you asking your question.
My pleasure.
And bringing up that discussion. Everybody thank Lemposs for stopping by today. All right, let's get to the last couple of questions here, and then let's wrap things up. I want to thank everybody for stopping by and watching the podcast. This was episode 34 of 6 Pixels Under Podcast. I'm nerdSlayer NS, your host. Let's finish off these questions, and then hopefully we can have a good rest of our Monday. Which will come out first, Cyberpunk 2077 or Vampire Masquerade 2? I'm going to say Vampire Masquerade 2, just based on off of what I've seen, which is, you know, not scientific. I've put less faith in E3 over the years after realizing the amount of smoke and mirrors games go through even for gameplay demos. I'm the same way, Alundris, but the reason why I don't like E3 as much actually was going to it. Yes, I had a lot of fun. But going to the event, I completely realized it's not an event for developers, and it's not really an event for consumers. It's just an event for like the spectacle, you know, for like exhibitors, like for watchers. You know, if that makes sense. Like it's about being a convention nowadays. It wasn't public before, now it's public, so it's completely changed. I feel like now that it's a public thing, E3 as as an event is a public event. I think it's kind of changed now. The problem with it is that you think making it a public event would kind of open up the community aspects and make it feel a little bit more welcoming. But when I went, it just still felt corporate. So it's weird because it's an event and it's public, it's open to the public, but at the same time, it feels so commercial, if that makes sense. Whereas whenever I go to like Penny Arcade Expo, it doesn't feel super commercial. And because it doesn't, I think at least, it feels kind of just laid back. People are more chill. Developers are more willing to talk to you personally and things like that. Obi-Wan defeats him to hide Luke. That's interesting, Alanos. Thanks for that. What's your opinion on Microsoft and Sony making a streaming partnership together? I have no clue what to make of that yet. I've seen reports of that. Very, very interesting. And I've heard that even like Sony was surprised by it. Like people who worked for PlayStation, I should say, were surprised by it. So I want to see some more news about that. And I'm pretty much like completely undereducated on the topic. So I'm not really sure. I'll have to look more into it though. It looks interesting though. What do you think about the new Star Wars trilogy? Are you talking about like The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi and what's the new one called? I can't ever remember what the newer one's supposed to be called. My opinion is kind of my opinion of the original trilogy. Fun. Sorry, my yawning. Poorly timed. Right as I'm talking about the trilogy. No, my opinion is it's good, mindless TV, great B movies, solid action, good humor, fun, amazing visuals. And that's about it. That's kind of my opinion of the Star Wars movies in general. In general. Now, if you want my opinion of the Star Wars universe, it's probably my favorite universe. And I would say it's my favorite universe because the amount of possibilities are pretty much endless. I mean, there's so many different types of storylines and ideas of characters, different aliens. You have, of course, Jedis and different spectrums of the Force and how it's represented in dark side and light side. And yeah, Star Wars is just very interesting to me. But the movies, to me, I'm sorry, I don't go to the movies to watch a critical piece of art. I never have. I just don't really see the Star Wars movies that way. For me, they're just nothing but mindless enjoyment. Now, if I want to have a critical look at the movies, I mean, do I even need to do that? I feel like tons of people have done that already. People who are much better writers than I am. Thoughts on single-player games that steal ideas from MMOs? Are you kind of talking about maybe pseudo single-player games, like games as a service games? Maybe like Dragon Age Inquisition, where it kind of had like questing regions and weird things like that from MMOs. I don't know what my opinion is. Seems backwards, doesn't it? MMOs made content like that because they didn't really have the platform to make better content. Now single player games have the platform to make better content, and yet they're making MMO-like content? Yeah. The only thing MMO about MMOs is the massive multiplayer part. You know, it's the actual community and the players. What's completely unique about us on our own right? Persistence? That's been around for a while too, so yeah, the multiplayer aspects are kind of the more unique aspects. So having quests that are based around the idea of that, and then putting them in a single player game, which is not even based on being multiplayer, I don't know. It just seems like you're going backwards. It's like, why? You know? It's like I could drink a wine, or I could drink a beer that's been fashioned to taste like wine. I'd probably, if I drank much, I'd probably rather just drink the wine. If you play on the same servers as them, they pretty much have armies that follow them. They camp mobs, and they're the first to get anything. I see what you're saying now, HJ Smash. Thanks for the clarification. So he's talking about streamer servers. He's saying, do people like Asmongold, who are big streamers and are very popular on certain servers, do they kind of ruin the experience for some people? They absolutely do. Streamer servers are very much known as being kind of negative experiences oftentimes because they, depending on your audience, can be chock full of kids and things like that. So yes, unfortunately, they can be hostile breeding grounds of toxicity, but is it necessarily the streamer's fault? I mean, unless they're just openly engaging in it, and if they were, they should be banned or penalized, but not really. It's just an unfortunate reality that people like to kind of follow people around and give them things or annoy them, or you know what I mean, like harass them. It's why people really want to roleplay PvP, because on a roleplay PvP server, there's a certain expectation that things are going to be more so policed and people are a little bit more mature. But luckily, as I think that was Lemposs that said that, the good news about joining our community and our guild is that we have rules in place, and we're also a mature community. So although we might not restrict the access of younger people to join, it's all about being mature. We're here to have fun and enjoy this game and experience together, or whatever game we choose to play in the future, because there's many MMOs I'm sure we will play in the future together. So to me, it's more about preserving the community, preserving the experiences, and making it a fun place that people go to share and discuss ideas, debate against ideas, but also a place that they can meet people to play games with, and not really have to worry about a safe space, because like, in my opinion, my community is about having your ideas challenged. and being able to have that sort of more maybe nuanced discussion with people. And I wouldn't want that to be ruined by mass recruiting people into a guild and then joining some like supremely popular stream server. So that's kind of why I'm not really sure what server we're going to pick yet. If I have a streamer on the other side, I might pick that server. Like if I know somebody that I'm friends with or in relation to who's going to join up on Classic WoW, if they'd like to play Alliance, we might end up joining the same server just so we can make some YouTube content together. I might do something like that. But other than that, I have no desire to join like a supremely popular server just because, I mean, can you imagine how crazy it's going to be? Like, look at this Asmongold server. He's trying to do like world firsts and he's getting people just helping him for, like, can he stop them? Not really. He can't. They shouldn't ruin the experience, but just know that their servers will live and die based on their enjoyment, like Darkspear did when Swifty left. That's a good point. I haven't heard a lot of things about Darkspear since. What is a good progression system for an MMORPG? That is such a hard question to answer. There's so many good progression systems. I would say that the best progression systems are ones that don't rely on building X amount to level. And this is kind of the, in my opinion, revolutionary idea that Raf Koster has kicked around, which is the idea of usage XP. Instead of being given XP based on how many crafting items you create, you get given a crafting experience based on how much of that item or how many of those items get used. So that item actually being used itself would level you up. So there's interesting ways to handle progression that are based on more things than just time spent, right? Obviously, skill could be a factor in progression. Time spent is always going to be a factor in progression, but it doesn't have to be the sole. Maybe ingenuity, maybe you have to figure out a certain puzzle, and those sorts of things are kind of not really as great for progression systems because they get figured out and gamed right away. So oftentimes I find the best progression systems are ones that are based around the game being part of the progression. And what I mean by that is that playing the game progresses you, not just killing 60 billion goats over and over again is going to level you, because technically you're playing the game. But would you do that if you chose to? Unless you're just some goat-like massacre, probably not. You probably would want to do something else. So it's kind of like, does a crafter want to craft 10 belts, 1,000, or does he want to craft 10 belts and then craft 1,000 belts to level? Probably not. So it's like, how do we get over the idea of having to do the same thing as the only solution? That's kind of like how you make a good progression system, in my eyes at least. It has to be more than just repeating the same thing, right? There has to be another layer to it. It has to be attached to the gameplay. The ecosystem, if you will. It's all connected, especially in multiplayer games, and especially in MMOs. It has to be. That's how the world works, right? Did you know that druids used to have male armor originally? That doesn't surprise me. Druids seem like a class that have had a lot of OP aspects in them. Would be... Oh, wait, I already read that. Sorry, I'm trying to roll back to see how far I missed any questions. Any last questions, by the way, before we wrap things up? We're pretty much at the end of the podcast, so I'm just going through the last couple of questions here, and that's sort of it. It's a marketing event? Oh, E3 is? Oh, absolutely. E3 is a marketing event. It's about selling the industry. So it's like, it's fun to watch. Is there cool things? Should you be hyped sometimes and all that stuff? Yeah. But there's a lot of like what ifs, and there's a lot of, is what you're seeing really what you're getting? That's my problem with it. That's my biggest problem. Is what is being advertised to me what I'm going to be receiving? I'm not convinced anymore. Not after the dozens of gameplay trailers that I've seen that are not really gameplay trailers.
You've got the wrong guy. I'm good at shooting people, cracking wise, and pretending to know how to fight with my hands.
Oh, I didn't put my, sorry, my stream. If you guys are wondering why I froze up there, it's because I was wondering I didn't see my alert, so I gotta make sure to turn that back on. You guys can hear my sounds, but you can't see my alerts, right? Can anybody in chat who's not following follow to test it out? Or sub? I think it's working though. Because I just got a follow, but it didn't pop up on my dashboard. Oh, Thorazamund, thank you for the subscription. Welcome to the Nor Club. Here's for a tip. I missed that. Thank you. Yeah, that was a sub sound. Sorry about that. Welcome everybody, Thorazamund, Nor Club. Your complimentary make-believe imaginary fedora is on its way in the mail now. The good news is it's Prime free, 1-day shipping. So you should get it as soon as you wake up or go to sleep, depending on how you interpret dreams. What's the Twilight Gal poster on the background? Oh, so this is actually a special little poster that I got. This is a noir themed Zelda poster. So actually, if you look at it, what it says is a new Lincoln mystery. And here, that's the Triforce. Twilight Gal shows Zelda with her little like symbols right, summoning symbols. Then it shows her sitting on a desk, followed by 25 cents at the bottom right, then 10 books at the bottom left, and then it shows Link in the back. Link's the detective, so it just, I saw it and I was just like, I don't know, I gotta get that. One of the, it's kind of like, you have to have a Spike Spiegel, you have to have an like Sherlock. I feel like I got some of the OGs here. The OG people who dress up and look like a detective. Thanks, I appreciate your input. Look forward to playing Classic with you. Yeah, I look forward to playing with you as well. Can't wait. Just don't make sure you don't end up on a server with a big Russian community. Well, the funny thing is that the Russian community typically likes me. I've played lots of MMOs with the Ruskies. Yeah, actually, Lemposs made my point for me. He made my exact point for me, in fact. Russians are a handful, but I like to get them on my side in different MMOs, especially full loot. They will raise your shit to the ground for no reason other than they just want to see the world burn in those games. I know from experience. It's fun to be part of their alliance because of that. Asmongold isn't even good at WoW, to be honest. He was or wasn't? Sorry, I forgot if I said that or didn't. I don't know if people necessarily watch him because he's the best, but because he has a lot of knowledge, right? And because he's entertaining, I'm assuming. I've only ever watched his more recent WoW Classic streams. By the way, I thought of what might be a better expression for what sharding breaks. It ruins the continuity of experience rather than permanence, which better describes the lack of player effect on the environment. I would agree with that, Ulysses, by the way. Like the technical term you, the technicality you presented, I would agree with it. What's my opinion on VR as a platform for an MMO? It so far off, but the possibilities are just fucking incredible. Excuse my French, but I can't wait. I can't wait till the tech catches up. Having seen the tech on the stage floor and been introduced to them by developers working on the tech at E3, in fact, VR is just not there yet, but it's gonna be freaking awesome when it is. All right. In your opinion, what's the cringiest video game movie? I mean, it has to be either Prince of Persia Or that Doom movie. That Doom movie was pretty horrible too. That one, yeah, that one was pretty horrible. What are your thoughts on crowd control? Watching Asmongold stream, I saw him rant about how he hated crowd control in PvP, and that he thinks any mechanic that stops him from playing his character is garbage. Sorry, but that's a casual's opinion. That's a casual PvPer's opinion. If there isn't CC, then there's no way to deal with massive populations. If there's no CC, then there's no way to deal with people who just zerg. If there's no CC, there's no way to punish people who make inferior decisions, right? The reason why CC is super important in an MMO is because there isn't a physics-based combat system. So there isn't real CC. And what I mean by real CC, I mean actual collision detection. Blocking somebody off would be the best form of collision, or sorry, would be the best form of CC, right? If I could literally create a wall that completely blocks somebody off, that's the best crowd control. Crowd control works because it's put in, it's put in a game where essentially it needs crowd control. There needs to be some way of population control. There needs to be some sort of way to punish players who make bad decisions. And so it's usually based around the idea of CC. The problem is that in some cases, some CCs are kind of just like a one-button CC. So there's not a whole lot of like skill that really goes into it, right? So say, for example, a one-button retaliate or a one-button counter, that skill, it's like, it's debatable, right? Having a discussion of, is this skill centric, or is this, reliable, or is this even needed in a combat system? That's a whole different kind of discussion. But having the discussion is if crowd control should be in a game or shouldn't be in a game, because I don't want my character to not be able to, I don't want to be able to not control my character. Well, sorry, but there's a lot bigger concerns than your ability to control the character. Say, for example, the balance in the game, right? The flow of the game, the ability to take advantage of someone making a bad decision. A perfect example of this is if somebody trinkets out of a stun, but doesn't trinket out of a polymorph. Big difference, right? Huge difference. Now imagine you could never get stunned, or you can never get polyed, or you can never get any of those things. It's like, I don't know. He probably was just joking, just like frustrated. Thanks, Thrazimund. I appreciate that. And not to mention, that's a good point. Alundris also added a good point to that. That's if you're a CC, sorry, if you're a melee class in a game, you're always going to hate CC. You're always slow, you name it. But that's the beauty of open world PvP, guys. Open world PvP is about using all of the different class weapons. Not just one, not just two. It's using all of them. Can we get someone with a shaman so they can use their totem here? Can we get a blizzard, a group of blizzard mages who are just running around spamming blizzard to slow people down? Can we get a group that's focusing on healing? Can we get, a group that's focusing on, like, that sort of stuff happens in open world PvP, and that's what makes it exciting, really, is all of the different forms of CC and different abilities and all the different classes and that sort of stuff. People watch it because he pretends to be retarded. Alrighty. He's a little too hyperbolic. I feel like it's hard not to be hyperbolic whenever you're a really prominent content creator. Like a streamer, I should say. Because everybody's watching you, so you just... One calm, innocent... This is over the top. Next thing you know, everybody's parroting it as like a real belief. So it is kind of like hard to be a content creator. You see it a lot with like Zero and Smash. Are you saying PvP has more than 2 people? All right, so we've reached the end of the podcast. I've reached the point to where looks like the questions have just about dried up, and it looks like everybody's going back to their lunch break. So I want to thank everybody once again for dropping by and joining me on this episode 34 of the podcast. We talked about the Epic Store Wars. We talked about Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines and Borderlands being pulled from the Epic Store briefly. We talked about the WoW Classic launch, what it means, possible concerns, problems, and all of that sort of stuff. We talked a lot about just MMOs in general. From the Vault section, we highlighted Wurm Online, which of course, as I mentioned, was a sandbox game that came out in 2006. The game is still playable, so if you'd like to try out any of that terraforming, any of that sort of stuff, if that interests you, maybe we should do a community stream sometime and build our own town or something fun like that. That'd be something fun to do for sure, and something that's very, very possible in this game, as innovative and experimental as Wurm Online was by those guys, by those two dudes from Sweden, huh? They can make a crazy, innovative MMO with a fraction of the budget and none of the resources that these other guys have. Anyway, I just want to say goodbye and thank you all for your support as always. As I mentioned, the Asheron's Call video should be coming out by the end of next week. The Kickstarter video is actually in current production right now. Tom is already working on it, my editor. So that should also be coming out as well. So those are 2 videos in the works right now already. I'm currently working on a WoW video that I want to put out. I'm going to put out a series of WoW videos, of course, in the next couple of months since WoW Classic is on the horizon. And I'm hoping that you guys will enjoy my coverage on it because I'm trying to make it, you know, as me as possible. I know that's what you guys want. So anyway, said goodbye. About that time, I'm not going to let you guys get me caught in any more rants. One last Fedora tip for those who subbed today and those who followed and those who stopped by to watch. Thank you for the support and thank you, detectives.